Welcome to another set of readings from my simplified and abridged version of The Perfect Way by Anna Kingsford and Edward Maitland. My first reading this time is from the fourth lecture and concerns the Atonement. The popular and corrupt view of the doctrine of the Atonement is one of the most striking examples still existing of religious materialism amounting to idolatry. To commit the sin of idolatry is to present spiritual truth in material terms, through concealing under gross images the real substantial ideas they imply, and setting up these images for worship in place of the celestial verities they represent. Now, the current doctrine of Christ's atonement starts with the irrational and therefore false hypothesis that there is a direct and corresponding relation between physical blood and moral guilt, on account of which sacrificial torture and bloodletting constitute a medium of exchange, enabling an indefinite number of otherwise lost souls to be ransomed. In opposition to this and other similar conceptions, it is necessary to insist on the principle which was given particular prominence in our first lecture, as it is, so to speak, the cornerstone and center of gravity of religion, the principle that sacred mysteries relate only to the soul and have no connection at all with phenomena or with any physical appearances or transactions. The keynote of religion is sounded in the words, "My kingdom is not of this world. All her mysteries, all her oracles are conceived in this spirit, and all sacred scriptures are to be interpreted in a similar manner." Therefore, if anything in religion is to be true and strong, it must be true and strong for the soul. The soul is the true and only person concerned. And any relation which religion may have to the body or phenomenal man is indirect and by correspondence only. It is for the soul that the divine word is written, and it is her nature, her history, her functions, her conflicts, her redemption, which are always the theme of sacred narrative, prophecy, and doctrine. But a priesthood that no longer understands spiritual things and is only competent, therefore, to discern the things of sense, a priesthood that has become, in a word, idolatrous, is necessarily incapable of attaining the level of the original framers of the mysteries relating to the soul. Invariably, in the hands of such a priesthood, the soul has been ignored in favor of the body, and a grossly materialistic meaning has been read into that which was addressed only to the spiritual man. There is nothing more perplexing to the thoughtful mind than the doctrine and practice of bloody sacrifice, commonly believed to be strenuously insisted upon in that portion of the Hebrew scriptures known as the Pentateuch. And the perplexity is increased by a comparison of this with the prophetic books, in which are to be found declarations, such as the following in the book of Psalms. "Sacrifice and offering thou dost not desire. Burnt offering and sin offering thou hast not required, but that I should do thy will. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a lowly and a contrite heart." And the following in the book of Isaiah. "Hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Give ear to the law of our God, you people of Gomorrah. Why do you offer so many sacrifices to me, saith the Lord? I desire not burnt offerings of rams and young animals, the blood of calves and sheep and goats. When you come before me, who required these things from you? Offer sacrifice no more. Your new moons and festivals I cannot abide. Your assemblies are wicked. My soul hates your ceremonial rites. When you stretch forth your hands, I turn away my eyes, for your hands are full of blood. And also the following in the book of Jeremiah. I, the Lord, spoke not to your fathers, and I commanded them not in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt concerning the matter of burnt offerings and sacrifices. But this one thing I commanded them, saying, listen to my voice and walk in my way. But they have committed abominations in the house that is called by my name and polluted it. In the presence of these truly divine words, what must our verdict be on certain contrary declarations and instructions in the Pentateuch? We must say that the greater part of the 5 books, and especially the chapters laying down ritual and offerings, are of a far later date than that usually assigned to them, and are not in any sense the work of the inspired Moses or of his immediate successors, but of a corrupted priesthood in the age of kings, a priesthood greedy for gifts, tithes, and benefits, always replacing the spirit by the letter and the idea by the symbol, ignorant of the nature of man, and therefore always trampling underfoot his true and better self, the soul, whose type is woman. But for these bloody and idolatrous sacrifices, there would have been no need for the numerous officiants who derived their livelihood from them. And but for the false and corrupt conception of a God whose just anger was capable of being appeased by such slaughter of the innocent, and whose favor could be bought by material gifts, the whole colossal scheme of ceremonial rites and incantations which gave the priesthood power and dominion over the people, would never have found place in a system originally addressed wholly to the needs of the soul. So, even with the Old Testament alone as evidence, our verdict must be given to the prophet as against the priest, seeing that while the former, as the true man of God, directed his appeal to the soul, the latter, as the minister of sense, cared only to exalt his own order, no matter at what cost to the principles of religion. Turning to the New Testament, a significant fact confronts us. It is that Jesus appears never to have sanctioned any of the temple services by his presence, an abstention which can only be regarded as a tacit protest against the sacrificial rites then in vogue. Nor is there any reference to these rites in any of the statements attributed to him, even in connection with the common belief that they were designed to symbolize the death supposedly ordained for the Messiah in his role as Redeemer and victim. And truly, if the special purpose and goal of his incarnation had been, as currently claimed, to be sacrificed on the cross as a spotless sin offering for humanity, to appease the wrath of God against the guilty, it is inconceivable that no word implying a doctrine so essential and tremendous should have been uttered by the divine victim himself, or that it should have been left to later statements of uncertain authorship and interpretation, and chiefly to men who never were disciples of Jesus, namely Paul and Apollos, to formulate and explain it. Nor can we regard as other than fatuous the conduct of a priesthood which, while placing on the cross of Calvary the burden of the salvation of the whole world in all ages, and teaching mankind that their rescue from eternal damnation is solely due to the innocent sacrifice offered on this cross, yet sees fit to denounce and brand with infamy the very men who procured the consummation of that sacrifice: Caiaphas, Pontius Pilate, and most important of all, Judas the traitor, thus making the world almost as indebted to them as to Jesus himself for ransom from hell and for the opening of the gates of heaven. The truth is that far from depicting priest and prophet as cooperating for the welfare of man, the sacred scriptures show them in constant conflict with the priest as the minister of sense, perpetually undoing the work performed by the prophet as the minister of the intuition. And so it is seen that when at last the greatest of all the prophetical race appears, the priesthood does not fail to bring about his death also, and subsequently to exalt the crime into a sacrifice, and one of such a nature as to make it the glorification of the whole priestly system, and to advance the priestly order to the position it has ever since maintained throughout Christendom. At this point, another aspect of our subject needs to be considered. It relates not to any particular sacrifice, but to the whole question of the origin and nature of bloody sacrifices generally. And it involves reference to the influences and motives even darker and more potent than any mere human desire for gain or power, in exposing which it will be necessary to speak of occult subjects that are familiar only to those who are acquainted with the science of magic and thus understand at least something of the nature and conditions of spirit apparitions. The shedding of physical blood has, in all ages, been a means by which magicians have evoked astral phantoms. These emanations of the lower atmosphere, directly related to the body, have a close affinity for the essential element of the blood and are able to manifest themselves materially by means of its shedding. Thus, as one recent writer says, blood begets phantoms and its emanations furnish certain spirits with the materials requisite to fashion their temporary appearances. The famous Paracelsus also asserts that one may summon any spirit by the fumes of blood, since, using its emanations, the spirit can build for itself a visible body. This, he says, is sorcery, a term always of ill repute. The priests of Baal made incisions all over their bodies in order to produce visible objective phantoms. And there are sects in the East, especially in Persia, whose devotees perform religious rites in which, whirling frantically round in a ring, they wound themselves and each other with knives until their garments and the ground are soaked with blood. Before the end of the rite, every man has evoked a spectral companion which whirls round with him and which may sometimes be distinguished from the devotee by having hair on its head, the devotees being closely shorn. An experience of the writers received while preparing this lecture produces a good illustration provides a good illustration of this phenomenon. During hypnotic sleep, she was conducted by her guardian genius into a large temple-like hall where she saw a number of persons grouped in adoration around 4 altars, on which were laid the same number of slaughtered bullocks. And above the altars, in the fumes of the spirits of the blood arising from the slain beasts, were misty colossal figures, half formed only from the waist upwards and resembling the gods. One of them in particular attracted the writer's attention. It was the head and bust of a woman of enormous proportions and wearing the insignia of Diana. And the genius said, "These are the astral spirits, and thus will they do until the end of the world." Such were the illusory phantom images which presented themselves with emaciated forms and pallid countenances to the Emperor Julian, and claiming to be the immortals no less, commanded him to renew the sacrifices for the fumes of which they had been pining since the establishment of Christianity. And he, able only to see but not to discern spirits, took these spectres, as so many still do, for what they pretended to be, and seeking to fulfill their commands, earned for himself the title of apostate. The incitement to carrying out those horrible acts of human sacrifice in ancient times to Moloch in Canaan is attributable to spirits of this order. But idolatry and bloody sacrifice have always been regarded with loathing by the true prophet and the true Redeemer. The way these things are viewed by such as these is summarized in the divine and beautiful rebuke of Gautama Buddha to the priests of his day, an exquisite rendering of which is to be found in Sir Edwin Arnold's recent poem, The Light of Asia. Buddha, it will be observed, classed the habit of flesh-eating with the practice of bloody sacrifice, and included both in his unsparing denunciation. We do not have to look far for the reason. Man, as the microcosm, resembles all things in the macrocosm, and like the latter, therefore, has within his own system an astral plane. In eating flesh, through which he ingests the blood principle, flesh and blood being inseparable, he sacrifices to the astral emanations of his own magnetic atmosphere, and in so doing, serves the earthly and corruptible. This is to eat of things offered to idols, since blood is the food of the astral phantoms, and the eater of blood is infested by them. It should be observed that this astral medium and its emanations are incapable of originating ideas, because these are positive entities and come from the celestial or spiritual heaven. Besides, since the astral is merely reflective and unsubstantial, it receives divine ideas only to reverse and make a mockery of them. Thus, the doctrine of sacrifice and of atonement are true doctrines and celestial in their origin, but the sacrifice must be of the lower human self to the higher divine self, and of personal external affections to the love of God and of principles. But the astral mind, reversing the truth, converts these aspirations into the sacrifice of the higher to the lower nature, of the soul to the body, and of others to oneself. Again, the truth that man is saved by the perpetual sacrifice of God's own life and spirit to be his life and spirit is similarly distorted in the notion that man is saved, similarly distorted in the notion that man is saved by taking the life of a God and laying claim to his merits. The true meaning of the word atonement is reconciliation rather than propitiation or appeasement, as heaven cannot be propitiated or appeased except by at-one-ment. Also, because the astral and the physical planes are intimately united, and both are fleeting and transitory, being of time and of matter, anything that nurtures and serves the astral stimulates the physical to its own detriment and the detriment of the inner and permanent duality of soul and spirit. That is, to the detriment of the true man and of his divine particle, since these, on account of their celestial nature, have no dealings at all with the merely material and insubstantial. For the astral emanations resemble clouds which occupy the earthy atmosphere between us and heaven, and which, despite their filmy and tenuous nature, are nevertheless material and are born of the exhalations of the earth. To perpetuate and offer sacrifices to these phantoms is to thicken the atmosphere, to obscure the sky, to gather fog and darkness and tempest about us, as did the old storm witches of the north. The worship of the serpent of the dust is of a like nature, and anyone who ingests blood is guilty of such worship, because in so doing he makes offerings to the infernal gods of his own system, as does the priest who sacrifices to the powers of the same sphere of the macrocosm. This occult reason for abstaining from the partaking of flesh is the one which in all ages and under all creeds has always had a powerful and universal influence on the recluse, the saint, and the adept in religion. As is well known, the use of flesh was in former times always renounced by the hermit fathers, by the ascetics of both East and West, and in short, by all religious persons, male and female, who aspiring after complete detachment from the things of sense, sought interior vision and intimate union with the divine. And it is now similarly renounced by the higher devotional orders of the Catholic Church and of Oriental adepts. Let us boldly say, and without fear of contradiction, from those who really know, that the interior life and the clear heaven are not attainable by those who are partakers of blood, those whose mental atmosphere is thick with the fumes of daily sacrifices to idols. Because as long as these shadows infest the man, obscuring the expanse of the higher and divine ether beyond, he remains unable to detach himself from the love of matter and from the attractions of sense, and cannot best only dimly discern the light of the spiritual sun. Abstinence from bloody sacrifices on all planes is therefore the gate of the perfect way, the test of illumination, the touchstone and criterion of sincere desire for the fullness of beatific vision. The Holy Grail, the new wine of God's kingdom, of which all souls must drink if they would live forever, and in whose cleansing tide their garments must be made white, is most assuredly not that bodily fluid common to all grades of material life, which is known to us under the name of blood. But just as this fluid is the life of the physical body, so is the blood of Christ the life of the soul. And it is in this interior sense, which relates to the soul alone, that the word is used by those who framed the expression of the mysteries. Thank you for listening.